Now for global business updates, Rotus Oddiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Dr. Abasi. Good morning, Ayo, Rufai.
Good morning,
viewers.
Rotus.
It is Friday. Sleep is coming soon. All right, Asian markets, stocks rising across the board. Bit of a rebound. Week on week, though, they're probably going to be negative. Partly because of what we saw on Wall Street yesterday with the markets rising. In part because of the CPI for November, which we will get into in a moment, but also you had the Bank of Japan raised rates, and if you're raising rates, that's actually negative for stocks because it makes borrowing more expensive. But then this is something that was telegraphed. So across the board here, you can see China, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, India, Australia, rates rising across the board. Now, of course, this was telegraphed, it was expected. Kazuo Ueda, I think he is still speaking right now in a press conference. The Bank of Japan raising its benchmark rate to 0.75%, 25 basis point rise. This is the highest level rates have been since 1995, so 3-decade high. He talked a lot about how we could likely expect, he was really careful about forward guidance, but he basically said that companies are going to be raising salaries because, the Japanese people are going to be requiring higher wages to compensate for rising inflation. Inflation has stayed above the 2.2% target for like 44 months in a row. November came in earlier today, 2.9% year on year. We did see 10-year and 20-year yields rising because, of course, new money coming in is going to be getting a higher yield, and so bond prices are going to respond to that. Yields have to go up, so prices will fall. Just your basic bond math there. And he just basically said that, things are going to be tilted to the upside. You all talked about this already, so not much to add. The European Union deciding not to use the 201 billion euros in frozen Russian assets, mainly Belgium, saying because most of the funds are housed in Belgium, and the Belgians are saying we don't want retribution from Russia. We also don't want to be exposed legally. So they're going to be issuing bonds which are going to be backed by the EU's budget, although the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Slovakia are going to be allowed to be exempt because they've voiced some opposition to it. And this is the difficulty in the EU coming to decisions because there's so many, you're having a 27 nation bloc. But it was interesting listening to Germany and Friedrich Merz, the new chancellor, actually voicing support for this. Everybody remembers what happened with Greece and their own debt crisis and how vehemently opposed Germany was to supporting it. So it was nice to see the most fiscally conservative nation, one of the most fiscally conservative nations in the EU and the largest economy, voicing support. And by the way, Ukraine doesn't have to pay back that loan. It's a 2 or 3 year loan. They don't have to pay it back unless Russia pays reparations to them, which is highly unlikely. ECB keeping rates unchanged. Christine Lagarde, 2% now for a 4th consecutive meeting. They did upgrade their forecast for GDP for this year for the Eurozone to 1.4 from 1.2, mostly based on services, domestic demand, stronger euro. You've had investors cycling out of US going into Europe. I showed you the returns for the European indexes in Italy at 29%, Germany at 20%, most of them outperforming the S&P. So they are more optimistic about growth in the Eurozone. Of course, they're still, she mentioned the Russia-Ukraine war. She mentioned, other trade tensions with the United States, negotiations, stuff like that. But on the whole, held rates, optimistic about the growth for the Eurozone. That's where we were with ECB. Bank of England, they were the opposite side of the coin. They cut rates to 3.75%. That was expected. 6 consecutive cuts in summer of 2024. It's been very, very close. This was 5-4. And Andrew Bailey, in his post speech and interviews he gave, said that, look, there's going to be more. He said there's going to be more close calls, and he was also said that listen, going forward, the UK economy is, things are pretty tight. We've showed you GDP numbers here. The UK economy contracted by 0.1% in October, contracted by 0.1% in September. I just saw news breaking this morning that the budget deficit is about 11.4 billion pounds. So the fiscal hole is big. And what does that mean? That means there's more pressure now to raise taxes or borrow more, and guilt or responding to that, because if you're borrowing more, you're putting more burden on interest payments and so on and so forth. So the UK is pretty tepid. And then I just flashed the quote. He was just speaking, there's so much news going on. He was talking to the BBC just a few minutes ago, and he was mentioning the fact that artificial intelligence is going to lead to labor displacement. We mentioned, we showed you unemployment numbers for the UK, 5.1%. Youth unemployment in particular is high. In fact, funny enough, it's everywhere. The U.S. Youth unemployment, I think, is double digits there. News, I didn't have enough time to put together the graphics. Ghana just came out with youth unemployment, I think, at double digits there. So across the board, you had Mr. Akintunde Sawyer yesterday, the managing director of the NEL Fund, how he was talking about the need to scale up Nigeria. So across the world, America, the UK, Europe, Africa, there's youth unemployment. And this AI thing with, by the way, I should point out, a lot of this was done with ChatGPT. We're not even using graphics designers anymore on our team. So, it's, you got to find new skills, as far as where things are going in the future. So, U.S. inflation. Okay, this is the really interesting one.
Don't be like that.
Look, I'm just telling you.
Don't be like that, Rotus.
It is incredibly intuitive. It says, Rotus, what do you want to do? It knows where I work. It knows I use graphics. It talks to me like a human being, and it gives me what I need, and it is fast.
The graphic designer has a family.
Look, he has to find a new set of skills.
Don't be like that.
All right, real quick.
Rotus,
this is the talk of the day. Let's check this out. November CPI for the US coming in at 2.7, right? It was quite a big miss. Estimates were for 3.1. Notice this is September. There was no October CPI because of the 43-day government shutdown. However, there has been a lot of skepticism around these numbers, and that is because it looks like the Bureau of Labor Statistics did what they call zeroing out October. So there was no data. They just kept October flat. And the thing is that if you take an average, if the three of you are averages, and I remove Rufai or remove Dr. Abate from that desk, the average is going to drop, right? So basically there was a bias. Here is what's his name? Ed Harrison, senior editor at Bloomberg News. Here he is explaining what they did, and there was more on that. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, so owner's equivalent rent in particular, shelter is the biggest component. I looked at the numbers, and if you look at the actual number for August and you compare that number to for September and compare that to November, you get an annualized increase of something like 1%. Now, if you go back and you compare September to July, you get an annualized increase of 4%. So what's clear that happened is that they did something to make the October number the exact same as the September number, and then they based the November number off of that, which artificially lowered the shelter cost, which is the largest component of CPI.
So this is Omar Sharif. He's the founder and president of Inflation Insight. Said this is totally inexcusable. The BLS just assumed rent OER, this owner equivalent rent that Ed Harrison just mentioned, which makes up the largest component of CPI, basically housing, were zero for October. Funny, remember anyway, Rufai mentioned this. Remember how somebody got fired when Trump didn't like the numbers? They like these numbers. The White House was like, it's fantastic. Trump's policies are working. Inflation is falling. Very, very interesting. All right, YouTube is shout out to our Rise News YouTube viewers, the largest, of course, in the country, possibly the largest in Africa for any news program on air right now.
Say that
YouTube,
again.
yes, indeed, and they are vociferous, they are just insightful, they are funny folks out there. YouTube has signed a contract with the Oscars, the Academy Awards, to broadcast the awards from 2029 to 2033. It's been broadcast since 1977 by ABC. This again shows, and this is part of the argument that Netflix was making when everybody was saying that there's antitrust concerns with Netflix buying Warner Brothers. Netflix has 300 million users. YouTube has 2.5 to 2.7 billion monthly active users, on a monthly basis. So they are huge. And again, this just shows the shift in trends when it comes to, viewership, TV viewership, and so on and so forth. Remember this graphic? We showed it to you. They pulled this out when they were trying to make the case that when you look at monthly TV viewing share by distributor, YouTube is number one, ahead of Disney, NBC, Fox, and these are the three there: Paramount, Netflix, and Warner Brothers. All right, finally, I know there's a big budget presentation later today. All share index, well, here we are, 46.09%. We're inching our way up. Yesterday, 0.35% rise in Nigerian stocks. That's our update for today.
Okay, thank you very much, Rotus. We've run out of time.